I couldn't help but notice recently that all of our favourite bands are getting older, and it's gotten me very worried about the future of music, but not for the reasons that you might think. So let's get into it. Let me explain. Okay, here's some stats for you. Dave Grohl, 55 years old. Josh Homme, 51 years old. Liam Gallagher, 51 years old. Julian Casablancas, 45 years old. Anthony Kiedis, 61 years old, and still dating girls in their 20s. Sergio Pizzorno, 43 years old. Alex Turner, 38 years old, approaching 40. Same with Miles Kane. Caleb Follower, 42 years old. Chris Martin, who put Chris Martin on the list? 47 years old. Damon Albarn, 56 years old. You get the gist. Our favourite artists are getting older. And to be crystal clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Certainly from my point of view, I for one, am not on board with the music industry's obsession with age, and especially young talent. Like for me, musicians often start their careers and are just getting going at 30, never mind finished. I don't think musicians have an expiry date. We're not sports people, we're not footballers. But what I do think is a problem is what I'm calling the artist pipeline. So picture this, right? You're a band like Arctic Monkeys or Foo Fighters. As you get older, inevitably life changes and things change for you, right? You go from basically touring non-stop and releasing albums every 2 years in that cycle to then slowing down. You start to release albums maybe every 4 years, every 5 years, like we've seen with Arctic Monkeys. And a lot of these bands, you slow down, you get married, you have children, you want to be around to see your kids grow up. And if you're a band that's big enough, like the Foo Fighters and Arctic Monkeys, you can afford to take longer breaks and more years off. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of our favourite bands, right? It's only natural that we allow them the space to have a life as well as just make music and tour the world relentlessly. But when one door closes, another one opens. So with bands like Arctic Monkeys, U2, Green Day, you can add a few bands onto that list, all releasing music far less frequently than they are today. You'd expect there to be a long list of exciting top indie talent just ready to pick up the mantle, right? To receive the torch, ready to step up to the plate and take up those headline slots for the festivals around the world. But there just isn't, at least not for me anyway. I mean, if we compare the world of rock to the other two major genres around the world, the evidence is kind of there to see. So in the pop world, if we look at the festivals from this year and last year, who were the main headliners? Well, Dua Lipa, Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, although with the stuff she's been putting out recently, not sure how long that'll last. But in the pipeline, we've got Sabrina Carpenter, who everybody knows the song Espresso, right? Olivia Rodrigo, Ash, Conan Gray. These are names of pop artists that are kind of on their way to become mainstay festival headliners. If we look at the hip hop space, we've got Kendrick Lamar, Drake, Travis Scott, Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, headlining festivals around the world. But in the pipeline, certainly in the UK, we've got Dave, we've got Little Sims, who I'm a massive fan of, AJ Tracy, H, and in the US we've got SZA or SZA, however you say it. I know she headlined Glastonbury this year, but she kind of wasn't ready, but she's definitely on her way to being ready at some point in the next couple of years. And then we've also got Ice Spice, Lola Brooke, who are both becoming big names and are sort of climbing the lineup of the festival circuits. And then we come to rock. So rock, we've got Foo Fighters, Arctic Monkeys, Kasabian, Coldplay, just to name a few. And these bands have been around for a long time. They've headlined festivals since I was about 13 years old. And then we come to the pipeline. So I've got down written here the Lathams, although they don't really have enough strong songs yet for me to really compete for the sort of headliner slot or the bands that will come on before the headline. I think Blossoms are a fantastic band and they're from Stockport, just like me. And I think they'll graduate to that next level of festival headliner soon enough. Apart from that, I don't really know who else there is. You've got Wet Leg and The Last Dinner Party. Both bands have good songs, but their sound just feels like a bit of a fad to me, dare I say it, at this point in time. It's really popular at the moment, but I feel like over time it's going to lose its shine. Their songs just don't feel timeless to me like the Monkeys' first album did, or Franz Ferdinand's music did, or Foo Fighters' first few albums did. But who else is there, really? I'm genuinely trying to think of a band that's come onto the scene in recent years that's given us the same level of excitement and anticipation as a band like Arctic Monkeys or the Libertines or even the Cribs, you know, Oasis back in the day, the modern sort of version of those bands. I'm not really seeing. And as a result, I'm a little bit worried because when these bands that we know and love eventually retire and slow down to the point where there are gaps for those headline slots, who are they going to be? It's really not obvious to me, looking at the pipeline of rock music, what those bands will be in the next 5-10 years, apart from maybe Blossoms. And I've kind of started to reflect on why that is. And I think it's down to 3 major factors, and we kind of need to be a bit worried about them. And I think the first sort of major reason is music trends. Music is cyclical, things go in waves, trends come in and out. We've obviously seen recently that guitar music's had a bit of a resurgence, but it's nowhere near the same level as the 90s where rock music and guitar music was dominating the charts. Now you'll be lucky to have a couple of rock songs that are in the charts, but it still made a bit of a resurgence, but it's nothing like it used to be. And we've sort of seen that kind of show itself in the industry, right? So take Glastonbury's headline slots this year, 2024. We've had Dua Lipa, we've had SZA, or SZA, and Coldplay. Pretty much 3 pop acts. Coldplay you could class as a rock act, but it's dominated by pop music. And Glastonbury was traditionally a rock festival, and it had been for years, but because of the way that music is now, because of trends, because of what people want, Glastonbury's effectively been forced over the past sort of 10 years or so to open up those headline slots to other types of acts, predominantly hip hop and pop acts. I think the second thing as well is sort of TikTok generation and what the rise of social media has done to music. It's kind of taken it away from being something that people would spend a lot of time on and really take the time to consume and pay money for, to effectively a commodity. And a lot of people use music not to be recognized for their music or their artistry. They make music to sell other products. Music is no longer the product. It is a means to market another product. And in many ways, because of streaming and that kind of thing, music is in essence worthless. So if you're a band and you are creating music, it's difficult. You've got to collaborate with lots of people, you've got to play real instruments. You can't just drag and drop a sample into Logic Pro and create something within a matter of hours, like Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso, for example. It's something that really takes a lot of energy and effort, and it involves a lot of people coming together to spend time on creating something. And maybe it's just not worth it anymore, I don't know. But yeah, I think that's kind of like one of the main factors is trends and being in a band and playing indie and alt rock music just not being that fashionable anymore. Maybe that's one of the factors. And remember, music is a business after all. It's the music business. And how do you run a good business? Well, you want to maximize your profits and your revenue, and you want to keep your costs as low as possible. So if you apply that mindset to a band sort of format versus a pop act, well, if it's a pop act, it's just one person. And yes, they've got an entourage, they might have a few backing dancers, but it's nowhere near the cost of having a band that all want their fair share, fair slice of the pie. And, you know, the cost, which I'll come into in a bit, around touring and equipment costs and all of that kind of thing, it just makes more sense to have as lean a business as possible. And, you know, to link back to that point around music being a commodity and something that now is used to sell other products, it's no longer the product itself. A business would think, well, what's the most cost-effective way of manufacturing, of producing that music so that we can get the highest level of return, the highest rate of return on our initial investment? So it's much cheaper to work remotely, to program drums in Logic Pro rather than having to hire a studio, miking up a drum kit, and then having to spend ages making it sound the way you want it to. It's very easy to hire a producer or a beat maker and outsource that rather than having a band deliberate for weeks on end over how a song should sound. It's just easier and it creates less friction. And as a result, I think that's kind of why the industry is kind of going that way. It's just easier. And it makes more sense from a business perspective. Although that's never really should be the intent of music, right? Music should be art. But in the modern day, how many people are making music for the true artistry of it, and how many people are making music to grow their revenue? So the second point is around the cost of touring. So obviously EU, Brexit, we left the European Union, and now new EU legislation has meant that it's way more expensive and way more of a faff to tour the EU. And new regulations have now meant it's much harder to do so. Why is it much harder to do so? Well, new EU legislation is very restrictive, a lot more restrictive than it used to be. So you used to be allowed to tour the EU freely. Now you need a visa for every country. Visa requirements are different for every country. So you can imagine it's a huge amount of paperwork and a logistical nightmare. The Musicians Union carried out a survey fairly recently, and they asked a bunch of musicians if it was viable to still tour the EU. Over half of the musicians that they asked said that touring the EU was no longer financially viable. So over half of the musicians that they asked said that they can no longer afford to tour in the EU. That's pretty damning. And because you might be in a band, you can times those problems and those finances by 4 or by 5. You also need to pay for the shipping of all of the equipment. You now need what's known as an ATA carnet for all of the equipment that you want to bring. All of the equipment has to be documented in a list, and you've got to put everyone up in a hotel, right? You've got to put the roadies up if you've got a few people with you to help set up gear, help the gigs go smoothly. It's just not feasible anymore, you know? Because you need the cash up front, and who were the ones that used to give you the cash up front? It was the record labels that would sign you, and then they would have a vested interest in developing you as an artist. And obviously in the modern day, they don't want that. They want the finished article. They want proof of concept. They want you to have a following online. They already want you to be doing the things that historically they would have been paying for and supporting you to do so. And they're no longer willing to take the risk on up and coming artists. They kind of want the finished article. So in terms of having that cash advance, that cash up front to pay for a tour to allow you to play gigs in Europe, you can forget about it. And the kind of third and final factor for me is modern living and modern tools and technology, and how they've shaped and changed our behaviours and tendencies. I think there are less bands just out there in general, and it's pretty obvious to see why when you have tools like Logic Pro at your disposal on the iPad and on your computer at home. Obviously the huge plus is it's convenient and cheap, and you can now make music from the comfort of your own bedroom or home studio for basically nothing. But one of the downsides is that people like to gravitate to the path of least resistance. So instead of getting up and getting out there, rain or shine, meeting up with friends, travelling to a rehearsal room to practice songs endlessly, they're just sat at home recording on Logic or watching YouTube videos on how to use a compressor or other YouTube music tutorials, because it's just easier, it's more comfortable, and it requires a lot less effort and energy. And I'm guilty of that too. I love sitting here and messing about on Logic and making mad sounds, but what I really should be doing is getting out there and playing live a lot more than I do currently. And this really matters because the bands that we know and love today, that we watch live headlining these festivals around the world, won't be around forever. Touring is notoriously grueling on the body and on the voice, and Dave Grohl is a great example of that. You know, despite being the age that he is, and despite him saying that he will go on forever, it's simply not sustainable, especially when you're his age and you've been doing it for as long as he has. Not to mention his kids are growing up and he's got a family, right? He's going to want to spend time with his family, a lot like other bands that are getting on a bit as well. And we can't just keep having the same headliners every year showing up regardless. We need to have that next generation of talent that are supported to pick up the mantle. And for me, the government really needs to do a lot more to support and nurture young musicians, and especially touring musicians that would previously have been able to afford to tour Europe but can't anymore. It's really important for our country and our culture and our legacy, in fact, that we keep nurturing and trying to develop artistic talent. I, for one, would really like to see more young talent that has potential to be supported both financially and with exposure to get to those sort of festival headline slots, because I think without it, music is just going to suffer. But yeah, I am keen to hear your thoughts on how you think the music pipeline is doing. For me personally, especially in the sort of indie and old rock music space, it just doesn't seem that healthy, and I think a lot of that is down to industry trends, but also the government not really supporting young artistic talent, and especially touring musicians because of Brexit and the cost now that musicians have to burden themselves. Or maybe it is there and I just need to look harder. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the future of music, especially in this space. Be sure to leave a comment down below if you think I've missed off any obvious future headliners for festivals around the globe. I would love to hear from you who they are. And as always, if you are looking to binge any more of my content, I will put a link to a few videos that you might fancy watching next. And I'll see you in the next one. 5 and you know it's true.